Hi everybody, this is Liz with Connecting Threads. Today I'm going to be talking to you about something that I'm very excited about, fabric panels. Now, a lot of you probably heard that and went, ooh, fabric panels. And I get it. Most of the quilters that I've talked to seem to fall into two camps. Either they believe that panels don't offer a level of creativity that they really enjoy in their quilting practice, or they look at a panel and they go, I don't know how I'm supposed to use this. It's a series of blocks or one block that I'm just kind of staring at going, how am I supposed to do this? And at the beginning of the process of me learning about panels, I have to admit that I think I fell into both camps. I didn't really know how to utilize them, but also I was worried that they would stifle my creativity. Now, as far as utilizing panels, that is so much of what I want this video to be about. How do you take a panel? How do you press it and cut it down? And how do you plan to incorporate it into a project, whether it be something small like a mug mat or a placemat, all the way up to a quilt. So let's start by talking about the different types of panels that you're going to run into, and then we'll move on to some of the best tips and tricks. So the first type of panel that you're probably used to seeing is something that is a one-off panel, and it's kind of like a pictorial panel. So this is a really great example. This is a Rocky Mountains illustrated panel. It is just one image. That's it. You'll probably see these with a lot of nature or wildlife. We have quite a few on our website. This one's my favorite because I really love the Rocky Mountains, and so I think the illustration is really beautiful. Now, this type of panel is super easy to turn into a quilt, and we actually have a fabulous guide for how to take a panel like this and turn it right into a quilt, and it is phenomenal. So this is a panel that can make a really great gift, and all you need to do is maybe add a border or two, quilt it, and bam, you've got a gorgeous wall hanging. I also think that these panels can be cut up in really fun ways, and this is where the creativity comes in. If you don't want to turn this directly into a quilt, we're just going to fold it down a little bit. And you'll notice that the bottom half of this panel, there's a lot of really beautiful texture here. So maybe you have a quilt where you want to produce a very mountainous look in your background, but you can't find the right fabric. Why not cut directly into this and cut a couple of pieces for maybe a foundation paper piecing pattern? These panels are not set in stone for how you use them. They can be really great for turning into a quilt, but also don't ever be afraid to cut them up. So let's go ahead and move on to the next type of panel that you'll run into. I call these a non-project project panel, and this is a perfect example of one. This is a gingerbread panel. It is an adorable illustrated panel with all of these cute little pre-sized blocks. So you'll notice that it is very easy to spot the different sized rectangles on this panel, and that is the kind of pre-suggested cut lines that you would use on a panel like this. But you'll also notice that there isn't really a preset determination of what type of project you could use this for. I look at it and I see you could turn it into a quilt. You could turn it into pillows. You could turn it into a holiday banner. You could turn it into placemats, mug rugs, bags, whatever you think would be fun. You can cut these down into different blocks and you can add borders and put them into any type of project. These are the types of panels that I'm really falling in love with because they offer a level of creativity that I think is super fun with panels. And this one is just exceptionally adorable, which is why I picked it. And it's a great example of a kind of nebulous project panel that maybe didn't come with set instructions for how to utilize it, but still has a lot of options for how you can put it into a project that you're excited about. Now, the last type of panel that I've been seeing a lot of are predetermined project panels, and that is going to be this one here. Now, this is the quilt label panel, and it is one of my absolute favorites. It is so easy to see exactly what they're trying to do with this panel, and I love it. There are sashing lines in between all of the individual blocks, and each block is very much a predetermined project idea. These are meant to be labels. You'll notice that there are some that say to and from. They've got dates. I really love this panel. This is actually the office copy, but I have one for myself because I just thought it was such a great idea. This is a great panel option for beginners because you don't really need to worry about what to do with it. You cut these out, you add them to the back of a project, a quilt, whatever you're working on, and boom, you've got a finished project. So these types of panels are good starters, and we've got tons of options. I'll have some links below about some sample panels that you can practice your panel skills with. Now, the panel that we're going to be using in this video today is one that is kind of that middle option. It is a project panel, but it doesn't have a predetermined usage. This is Fancy Fruit by Maywood Studio. Isn't it so cute? I love this panel so much. Now, these are square blocks. You'll notice that there's kind of a sashing around each one of these cute little drawings, but there isn't really a predetermined project for this. I see lots of really awesome ideas. You could turn them into tea towels, you could add them to a quilt, you could put them on placemats or mug mats. There are so many options for this, but because there is no predetermined project, you have to kind of use your brain a little bit and figure out what you want to do with them. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to teach you how to press a panel like this, how to prep it, and then how to figure out how to fit it into a project. Now, for different types of panels, there are different types of projects that you can do. That Rocky Mountain panel, I will link to the guide. That is very easy for add to batting, add some backing, boom, you've got a finished quilt. This requires a little bit more thought process, and that's why I wanted to suggest using it today, because I think you're going to really enjoy what this panel can turn into.
The first thing we're going to talk about is pressing. Pressing a panel may seem very simple and easy, but there are a couple of tips that I've learned over the last couple weeks of doing panel projects that I wanted to share with you. Starting with a very hot iron, you want to try and avoid pushing your iron all over the place. You'll see that I'm pressing and really pushing my iron into the panel, and doing so can stretch out your panel sections. So when I lift up my iron and move it out of the way, you can see the edges of this preset square. It's starting to get a little uneven from overpressing with too much force. As I push, you can really start to see the textile moving. This is why I'm very specific about pressing, but especially for a panel with predetermined outlines. So when you're working on panels and you're doing your pressing, this is a time to be very particular and detailed about how you press. First, start by grabbing some starch spray. I really like Best Press. You can use whatever you like. This will help make sure that your panel stays the set size. Next, make sure that you aren't moving your iron all around the place. You want to drop it, press evenly, lift, and move it above your panel. Then you're going to repeat, drop, press evenly, lift, and move. Let me show you. I start with my spray, focusing on an area where there may be obvious creases. I'll spray all over an entire section. I won't bore you with pressing this huge panel on screen. It would be so boring. And then take your iron and press evenly. I'll wait for maybe 5-10 seconds, lift up my iron, then press in my next spot, lift up, then press, and so on. So you'll repeat until your entire panel is done. I'm going to move across my entire panel section here, and as I lift up, you'll see that this square looks a lot more square than my last one. So this pressing is really helping to make sure that this square stays as even around the edges as possible. The more you move your iron, the more unevenness you're going to get around your edges. I know this takes a little extra patience and time, but that extra time results in a much better end project. Let's get into the basics of cutting down your panel. A panel like this has a ton of blocks. So this is just the first 6, but you'll notice that this thing is huge. There are 18 main blocks on this panel, and I want to pull 6 for a set of placemats or mug mats. So I only want to use the 6 that you see here. My first cutting tip is to slice off the section that you're planning to use to make cutting a little bit more manageable. Especially for these project style panels, I can cut off what I need and come back to use the rest for another project later on. For now, I'm going to cut this panel down into the 6 that you see here. If you want to use a ruler and a rotary cutter to be precise, and you can also save this sashing here, you can be very particular about how you cut. For me and for this panel, I'm not planning to use the sashing, so I'm just going to cut between the rows that you see right here. I'll grab a pair of scissors and just slice this down into the part that I'm planning on using. Now I have a more manageable set of 6 squares that I'll cut down. You can cut all these at once if you're feeling bold, but my other tip for cutting panels, stick to fussy cutting your blocks. I want to be very particular about the borders of all of these squares, and trying to cut all the sides at once ends up with some weird block sizes. I'm going to cut a corner piece right here. Start with a ruler that's pretty close to the size of your panel block. I want to try and size the block first, so hold your clear ruler over the square. I'm using a 6.5 by 6.5 inch ruler. You'll see that it's really, really close to 6 inches by 6 inches, but not quite. Even when you press properly and try your best, these blocks don't always end up perfectly square. It's just the nature of fabric and panels. Since these blocks are really close to 6 inches by 6 inches, I'm going to cut them that size. It'll give me a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. This makes sure that I don't have to see this black dotted line. You have the option to be more adventurous here. You can cut this to 6.25 by 6.25. But then I get into a world where I don't know if that black line will go away. I want to make sure that it completely disappears. So for me, a 6 inch by 6 inch square ensures that the block is easily sized and the line doesn't show. Another thing you want to check when you're cutting up a panel is to see if your blocks have any obvious vertical or horizontal lines that could be a tell that you cut up that panel incorrectly. Granted, you can't really cut a panel wrong. It's entirely up to you on how you want to cut it, but it can be a really obvious thing to see. That said, this is a great opportunity to grab your ruler and make sure that any obvious lines, like that horizontal one, are parallel to the block's edge. This 4.5 inch line on my ruler will align with the horizontal countertop line in the background of each block. By looking for these elements when I grab my ruler and fussy cut each block, it'll give me a very exact block size, and any obvious horizontal or vertical lines will properly line up with my finished project. If you've never fussy cut before, it can be a little tricky at first, but honestly, it is very simple. Line up the edge of your block in any lines you need, take your rotary cutter, and start by slicing one side. I like to pull my fabric down here and then cut the top side. Now, be very, very careful not to keep cutting too far because you don't want to accidentally slice up a neighboring block. Now I'm going to reorient my panel so the cut side is on the bottom left. I'll line up my ruler, my 6 inch lines along both edges of my freshly cut sides. I'm very, very careful here since I want this block to be precise. So I will cut the other side and that bottom edge. With your freshly cut block, it's very easy to figure out how to fit this into a project. Since I cut it to 6 by 6 inches, which you can see here, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side, my block's sewn in size will be 5.5 by 5.5 inches. Now that we have that sewn in size, we can move on to adding in any additional elements. I want to add some fabric to the top, bottom, left, and right. So now it'll be easier for me to figure out the size of those blocks by knowing the cut size and the finished size. Once you have your panel pieces cut, the next step is to figure out your design. You can start with something super simple. That's what I'm going to be doing today. Or you can add these blocks into a pattern that you might have already selected. There are so many options on where you can go from here. What I like to do is draw out my block and design on graph paper. And that's what you see here. The inner piece of this panel. Now remember, you always have to take the size of your finished block, so that's sewn in size when designing. So we may have cut it to 6 by 6 inches, But we need to design anything using the sewn in size, which is 5.5 by 5.5 inches. That gives us the 1/4 inch seam allowance that we need, and it helps you figure out what size to cut any additional pieces of fabric. I like to write down that information so that I never forget it, because it is very easy to mess up on math when you don't write anything down. Now, I won't bore you with all of the math here, but it is very important to sketch this design out on your graph paper. I've drawn out my center square, which I've lightly sketched a graph on since I've blown this up for easier viewing. I like to write down my sizing. So anytime that I have a block that I need to make, I need to write down the size of that block on my graph paper. That way it makes it much easier to go through and do this. I base this little placemat on courthouse steps. So it's a very simple design for us to figure out. The top, the bottom, the left, right, all of it is super easy. The top strips is where we're going to start. Now the top to bottom here is 2 inches. Then we match the width of it to the inner square, which is 5.5 inches. From here, using my graph paper as a guide, I'll size out each block. You can design whatever you'd like, and you can add these into sawtooth stars, 9 patches. There's a million ideas and a million blocks you can play with. Once you've prepped your design, you get to play with fabric. And let's be honest, that's pretty much everybody's favorite part. One of the reasons I really liked fancy fruits is because there are so many different colors. So there's pomegranates, lemons, apples. We've even got these adorable little oranges, which honestly are kind of my favorite. They're all so cute. And using these blocks as a base, I came up with a color palette using our solids that match all of the different colors in here. This is going to be my base for edges of my placemats. I'll pull it down right here. I match these colors to my panel blocks. I need to figure out how much of each fabric I'll need for each placemat. I'll start by matching each block to colors. For the apples, which I will start with, I kind of look around, maybe put them on top of my fabric. I like the idea of using green and red. I think it'd match really nicely with those apples. For the oranges, I'm thinking maybe orange and yellow would be really nice. It'd be a nice bright color palette. For the grapes, maybe I'll do red and green again, or maybe I'll add in that really nice kind of cream cornsilk color right there. I think it'll play really nicely. For each of these, I like the idea of pulling unique colors and doing a paint by number style design for each individual placemat. If you want to make a little color book for all of these gorgeous solids, we actually have a fabulous video on our Instagram that shows how to take our mini charm pack in solids and turn it into a little color sampler. It's a fun way to take a look at all of the solids and figure out what might match the panel that you're working with. After figuring out all the math for my placemat elements, here is what I ended up with. This is my center square, these cute little lemons. I've got some fun matching colors in yellows and greens, and once I sew it all together, it'll produce a finished placemat. I'll jump off screen to whip up this sample, and I'll show you how it looks at the end.
And there it is, my finished placemat. I absolutely loved this project, and I really hope that this video inspires you to use more panels.